Hi, this is Paul. The most recent Jordan Peterson video has dropped, and this is one that I know Jordan was very excited about. He talked about it quite a bit with John Vervaeke. The topic of psychedelics, which is a topic that Jordan Peterson gets very excited about and is very anxious to discuss and explore, and he's doing so with Carl Ruck and with Brian Muraresku, something like that. Okay, I should probably listen to it and get his name right. Now, there are quite a few videos out there with him after the release of his book, The Immortality Key. So many of you know I actually have two blogs. I have my Substack where I sort of do summaries of videos and other condensed things. And then I have my paulvanderklay.me or leadingchurch.com where I throw it up basically as a link dump. And so this morning I just made a compilation of some of the videos that you can find of Brian Muraresku. Somebody actually from Grand Rapids has been sending me links to a number of these videos, one with a Jungian psychologist, one with a Harvard academic. The Joe Rogan clip is out there right now. The Jordan Peterson one. Chris Williamson had a conversation with him. So he's out there. He's doing his thing. He's promoting his book, and there you go. I bought one in Kindle and Audible because I'm really quite curious about it. Now, every time I get into the psychedelic conversation, weird things happen. But fairly predictable things happen. So most of the church people sort of line up and say, no, hard no. A lot of the rest of you say, oh yeah. And then some of the hardcore people are like, Vanderklay, when are you going to take it? And then, because you can't really talk about it unless you know from the inside. Now, the interesting thing about Muraresku, I should hear how Jordan Peterson says it. Anyway, the interesting thing about him is that he hasn't done it either. And yet he's written this book about it, and the book's going to sell a fair amount of copies, and the book's already at least opening up a fair amount of interest in this little corner of the internet. And in looking at some of these videos, I thought probably the best way to begin to talk about this, because I think there's actually a lot of really important things to talk about this subject. And as with many things, I'm middle of the road. I think they should be studied. I think it is possible that there are pharmacological benefits to this as a culture. We already accept various psychiatric drugs for people. And those of you who have watched a number of my videos know that working with people for whom anti-anxiety meds, anti-depression meds, antipsychotic meds, mood stabilizers. I work with a lot of people who take these drugs and are prescribed these drugs. These drugs are a big part of our civilization. They're a big part of what goes on. There's a question, should some of these psychedelics be included? But I read Michael Pollan's book on psychedelics. I really enjoyed that book. I found it a very helpful book. He writes as sort of a standard secular materialist or physicalist, and we're going to get into those philosophical categories later. I think these drugs are worth studying. I think this topic is worth exploring, but for the reasons I'm going to get to, maybe not even in this video, maybe in subsequent videos, there's a reason why this has a heavy religious component, which I think it's more than fair domain for me to weigh in on, and my skepticism revolving around these drugs, okay? And again, as in so many other issues, I'm right there in the middle, and so a bunch of you get frustrated that I don't slam the door with a lot of other religious people and say, no, never. Others of you get very frustrated with me because I'm not taking any. I have no plans on taking any, and I have zero desire to take any. And I'll get into that as we go. But this is, for a certain group of people, become really a religion. And now what's interesting about his book is that his argument is that this is not only a religion, but the religion of the ancient Greek world. And that is something that is debated to a degree. Well, that gets enough attention. But then when he says basically this stands at the heart of Christianity, and that original Christianity was actually a psychedelic religion, and then mean old church fathers pushed it out of the way. Well, I thought the conversation with the Harvard academic was quite interesting on some of those notes, because the Harvard academic pushed back on him, and I thought some fair ways. But I think the best way to get into this is the question of the contemporary religion, quasi-religion that is sort of swirling around it, for which this book, and to a degree, I think Jordan Peterson's interest and, dare I say, perhaps even promotion of these ideas, that's why we have to get into it. And I think the best way into it is actually this video from After Skool, which, now this channel has treated a fair amount of Jordan Peterson's work, and I think, well, whoever is doing this channel, I don't know who's doing this channel, but they're very skillful. They're clear thinkers. They present their material clearly, concisely. I could only hope to be as clear and concise as these people. And so I think in many ways, this is probably, not having yet read the book, okay? So maybe after I take a look at the book, I'll feel differently. But without looking at the book, for me, this is the clearest presentation of a particular group who are really jazzed about this book and are really excited about Jordan Peterson's interest and or promotion of these ideas. And so I do commentaries on Jordan Peterson's videos, on other little videos. I don't know how the YouTube algorithm is going to feel about me doing a commentary on this video, on this channel. It's a big channel. They've got, 1.8 million subs. There's a lot of little things that go into that, but I'm going to try it and see how it goes. In typical PVK long-winded fashion, even before I start the video, I have to make a comment on the words already. The best kept secret in history. Mysterion is a word that plays heavily in this video and heavily in the conversation. And it is because I'm a pastor and because I do exegesis on the New Testament and because this is an important word in particular texts, including in the Apostle Paul. The word doesn't just mean a cover-up. It doesn't just mean a secret. And those tend to be what sort of grabs this conversation here. Now, so if we're going to speak psychologically, one of the self-deception, to use a Vervaeke thing, one of the silly little tricks that you can play on human beings, one of the silly little tricks that you can reliably play on human beings is to announce a cover-up. Because suddenly, if something is concealed, we all want to see behind the curtain. We all want to see the thing that is being covered. We want to know why it's being covered up. Now, this, in my opinion, goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, because that is the trick that the serpent plays on the woman. That tree that's in front of you, it's the best tree. God is holding out on you. He's trying to keep good things from you. This is a stupid little human trick that people reliably fall on. So the best way to get someone's attention, just like that silly old commercial used to say, is whisper. It's a secret. And so, again, Gnostics, even just mentioning the word Gnostic gains attention because Gnostics were big into secret knowledge. And this is a reliable trick you can play on human beings. I've got something I'm not going to show you. Then suddenly, These are all these patterns of self-deception that John Vervaeke is talking about. This is thinking fast and slow. This is all these stupid brain tricks that reliably work on humans. Now the best kept secret in history. Okay, there's a value hierarchy, and we're putting this way at the top. This is the best kept secret in history. Finally, the key, the one thing that's going to make my life great, and every advertiser knows this trick. So before we even start down this road, let's recognize that there's a degree of bullshittery involved in the presentation of this, okay? When you pump something up this high, call me a little cynical, expect that there's going to be some smuggling and some promotion and a whole bunch of things. So the best kept secret in history. Okay, here we go.
If you die before you die, you won't die when you die. That's the...
Now, before we get any further, because again, by the end of this video, the maker of this video seems to forget the main line that this video is actually revolving around. If you die before you die, you won't die when you die. Now, again, someone might listen to this and say, boy, that sounds a lot like something that Jesus would say. Yeah, it does. This is something that, as he will say, early Christians talked about. But when we get to the end of this video, in a secular rationalist, well, he's probably not a rationalist physicalist, but he definitely, this video is definitely framed in physicalism, which we will see at the end of it, and which is an important part of why important element of why this whole idea right now is really very popular. Okay, it's critical to understanding why this is popular. But so don't forget this line, and it's going to be told to us in Greek. It's going to be told, and it's in English, and it's going to be told to us, and there's going to be a little bit of a 3-card Monty shell game that goes on at the end of this video. So keep it in your mind. Now I got to listen very carefully, so maybe I'll listen to how to say Brian's last name if whoever made this video is saying it correctly.
The key. I call it the immortality key. It's the big job. It's what we're all looking for, right?
Or maybe he's doing the audio for this video. Oh, that could be. So he didn't say his own name. Now I'm in trouble. Now, pay attention also here because, well, none of the symbolism that we see being written before us is incidental or arbitrary. All right. The prophet of purpose, Jonathan Peugeot, could sit down and look at this, and you might say, oh, look at all the trees. Of course, trees connect heaven and earth, Woden's tree, but they have DNA. So we already have sort of a science-y, ancient, modern vibe going on in here. We've got 2 rivers, and we're going to sort of have a tree of life, and there we have the yin and the yang, and we have this key and this, shadowed human being.
The meaning of life? What does it mean to be alive?
Now we've got sort of upside down eyes. We've got a little bit of blue that's getting us, kind of a Hindu vibe. Got kind of a psychedelic vibe going on. We got this key in the middle, and the eyes are upside down, but they're definitely looking at us. And again, we have more genetic double helixes.
What happens when we die? Is there a God? Is there a point to any of this?
Okay, so these questions that are being asked right here are fairly standard questions for physicalist culture. Okay, you can say naturalist, you can say materialist. We're going to use physicalist. Perhaps it's the most fair word. It's the word that seems to be replacing naturalist or materialist. So we're going to use that word.
Well, according to the ancient philosophers and mystics, there are answers to these questions, like real answers.
Real. And again, there's that fudgy word. Real is a really fudgy word. He's holding a globe, but they're sort of Greek, and so, yeah, I feel an evangelistic crusade coming on here. These are real answers to the questions that physicalist people in a secular culture have.
Philosophers and mystics.
Philosophers and mystics. Okay, so the philosophers, the rationalists, the mystics, so those are more the intuitive people. Again, so you're casting your net out to a very broad audience. Philosophers hit the rationalists. Mystics hit the intuitives. We can parse this out in a Myers-Briggs sort of way.
Are answers to these questions, like real answers.
As opposed to...
They're not hidden away in some book or some dark corner of the internet. They're not necessarily...
Hidden away in some book. Well, I don't know. Books are all over. Wouldn't you kind of like one in a book? But you don't have to work too hard. See, that's a real piece of this too. You don't have to work too hard. Because a lot of religions basically will say, well, if you want real answers, you have to work for them. Hop! This is America. We want a pill. We don't want to have to work too hard.
Necessarily in your local church or temple. And even if Moses, Jesus, and the Buddha himself were sitting in your living room, they couldn't tell you.
Okay. Pluralism, another big deal in our contemporary culture. So we want to answer questions about death because for physicalists, death is a real issue. Okay. Death is an issue for many cultures, but for our culture, it's especially a big issue because it's anxiety promoting, because the contemporary dominant worldview cannot answer the question about death. And so there's just a lot of folk religion that goes out around death and how we have real answers. And again, when you use this word real in a secular physicalist culture, they mean something like science-y answers. And that's a big piece of the popularity of this conversation in this part as well. Now, the pluralism, Moses, Jews, Jesus, Christians, Buddha, they'll say, can't tell you. Now, what's really interesting is that the premise of this video says, this isn't something we can tell or educate you in. So sit back for the next 13 minutes and we will tell and educate you about it. And it's like, wait a minute. If you really believe this part right here, you should stop right now and just say everybody should take psychedelics. He's not going to say that because that gets you could get in a little trouble with YouTube if you start saying LSD in the water supply, please, now, for the sake of the world. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later too. So can't tell you, I have to show you. And so right away, more little Gnostic-y vibes coming through this video. Because what's really interesting for a lot of people who say, I can't tell you, it doesn't mean they stop talking. Now, some people are out there when they say, I can't tell you, and they stop talking. When I see them do that, I think, they really believe they can't tell me. So they've stopped talking. Fair enough. But most people, when they say, I can't tell you, and they keep talking, you should pause and say, wait a minute. You just told me you can't tell me. Why are your lips still moving? I have to show you. Okay, are we going to go someplace? You're going to draw a picture? No, I want to put something in your body. And it's to say, people sort of have, we kind of, as human beings, kind of like to have an idea of what you're putting in my body. Is it a vaccine? Does the Food and Drug Administration say it's okay? Is it food? Is it poison? And Jordan Peterson talks about that a little bit in his conversation with this guy.
Because it's nothing you can actually learn.
So, end of video? No.
Nothing for your rational brain to compute, at least.
Let's not be rational about it. There's sort of a little tricky end around because... And again, I've had these conversations with people and they'd say, well, you have to stop being rational. You just gave me a very rational statement to tell me to stop being rational. So if I believe you and if I understand the rationality of your statement, then I shouldn't believe it. It's another one of those, what did Nick say? Those Godelian cycles, like that phrase that we saw. Oh, yeah, the Godelian paradox. Godel specifically cites Richard's paradox. The liar paradox has semantic analogs of his syntactical incompleteness result on formal undecidable propositions in Principia Mathematica and related systems. The liar paradox is the sentence, this sentence is false. So don't believe reason. It's kind of like Steve Jobs when he's up in front of Stanford and says, don't believe dogma. You just gave us one. Anyway, back to the best kept secret in history.
My hero, the late Joseph Campbell, once said, it's not the meaning of life that we're after,
People say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking.
I think he's right there. Because, and when it's sort of implicit is a meaning, like, okay, something I can put in a sentence. And this is where I think Vervaeke is, it's not propositional what we're really looking for. Propositional is important. We can't live without it. We rely upon propositional knowledge for all kinds of things, but fully, propositional knowledge is insufficient for what our heart longs for. Now, some Augustinian roots in me are going to be coming out, as you might imagine.
I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive.
Okay. Yeah, slow this down. No, you're using rationality. It's kind of like coming up to someone and say, give me your wallet. They're like, no, you're using rationality. Stop using rationality and give me your wallet. Oh, okay. See, that's what we really want from people, though, isn't it? And politicians would like it. Everyone, okay, maybe I'm a cynic. Maybe I'm being cynical. A lot of what people want from us is hand over the keys of your agency and give your agency to me. So I can't, how many superhero movies are about this? They're going to have some machine that somehow hypnotizes humanity and everybody basically does what they want. This is a big desire that human beings have, because for many of us, the biggest obstacles in our lives are other human beings and their wills. So, but I think Campbell, I really love this little quip. He makes a really good point here.
I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive.
Now, before he finishes this, and again, I'm not really critical of this thing, but okay, right now at 1:16 p.m. on July 20, 2021, I think I'm having an experience of being alive. Oh, but that's not really what we mean. Because I'm always having an experience of being alive when I'm awake, and even when I'm dreaming, I'm having an experience of being alive. We're getting very Cartesian here, but he's going to say more, and it's important. But before he said that, I wanted to get that in because there's sort of a whoosh about this, that I want an experience of being alive. You mean as opposed to right now? Because I think I'm experiencing it. It's not a very happy time. It's a little flowish because I'm making a video, but, not bad. But that's not really what he means.
We're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that the life experiences that we have on the purely physical plane will have resonances within that are those of our own innermost being.
Okay, the life that we're experiencing on this physical plane, well, yeah, have resonance with life on another plane. Now, this is something I've talked about in a lot of videos. Because if you want to understand human beings, and there's lots of ways of talking about this, you can use the book of Ecclesiastes. God has put eternity in our hearts. So what does he mean by that? Well, it means a lot of something like this. That on one hand, it's the same example as when I was a seminary student. I visited my grandmother. My grandfather had already passed away. My grandmother was living alone in the retirement home. So it was right across the street from where I went to school, and so I'd visit my grandmother, and she was in her late 80s. I think she died in her early 90s, and she sat down and she told me, my fiance or wife, I don't remember when it was. She sat down and she said, you're looking at an old lady here. So, yeah, Grandma, that's kind of how I've always known you. But inside, I feel like I did when I was your age. And when you're like in your early 20s, it's like, but now I'm in my 50s, and it's like, yeah, I know what she means. Inside, part of me feels like I did when I was there. And this gets into the idea that we live in the age of decay. Everything around me is decaying, aging, falling apart, dying, changing. And the Greeks were very much into this. But, the mind, the forms, Platonism. C.S. Lewis, who is, a Platonist in many respects, says, all loves in this world die by death or betrayal. But love, the idea of love, doesn't age. And so what he's saying, what Joseph Campbell is saying here is that we want to somehow connect this life down here in the age of decay with a life up in the heavens. That's sort of the way the Bible talks, that doesn't decay. So, for example, in the book of Colossians, when the Apostle Paul says, your life is hidden with Christ in heaven. Well, what does he mean? This is a lot of what he means. That our life, well, what do you mean by our life? Jesus says, if you try to save your life, you'll lose it. If you lose your life for my sake, you'll find it. Well, what does Jesus mean by life? Suke is what the Greek has. What's he saying with that? Well, it's kind of similar to what Joseph Campbell is talking about here, that in many ways our lives are split, just like my grandmother's life was split. On one hand, when I was visiting her, she was in the last years of her life. And she said, my body, my husband is dead. I live in this retirement home. I have to deal with, my grandmother had arthritis. She would get up and, get those knees working. And my grandmother was quite a lady. But, inside, I'm this young person trapped in an old body. Inside, I have an age. And this is where I get into the question of what is your life? And in many ways, your life is a story. Because stories don't age. And you can look at, well, let's see if I can actually have any. I almost never have much fiction on this shelf here. But, well, here's a story. Here's a book with a story in it. This is Andy Littleton's story, the church planter that I had on. So Andy Littleton's story isn't in this book. And it is in this book. Well, it's kind of both ways. It's because the story is immaterial. The story doesn't decay. Now, you might say, well, where does the story live? Well, that's a really interesting question. It sort of lives in this book, but I could throw this book away and it wouldn't harm the story. This book sort of participates in the story. This book sort of contains part of the story, but it's only part of the story because combinatorial explosion, the story is far larger than this book could ever deal with. So again, I like this quote from Joseph Campbell. He's getting at something that Christianity by no means denies. In fact, talks about. Physicalism has a harder time with it, but, when I remember listening to Daniel Dennett on Unbelievable say, well, there's material and then there's information. And I thought, game over. New atheism is done because once you allow information, it's all going to come apart for you. Sorry. Anyway, back to this, because it's a good quote.
And reality is within, that the physical plane will have resonances within that are those of our own innermost being and reality. And so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive.
Ah, right there. This is what we want. We want rapture. And what picture should I pull up? Is this rapture? Is this what rapture looks like? Now, this is a guy who lives in the neighborhood who is often just outside my door, one of many individuals. And this particular day, he had a few bottles of something, and he drank it. And he laid there for about 48 hours. He didn't get up to go to the bathroom. I knew that because you could see that he just went to the bathroom right where he was. Was this rapture? Was it numbness? Was it sleep? What are we talking about? And this gets into, again, most of us, if we drove by here and we recognize this person as our father or our grandfather, we'd say, well, just today, in fact, on Twitter, car drove up to the corner and a young woman got out and she saw me and asked, is he there? And I said, the only way to tell is to walk up and take a look. And so I went with her, and she was a bit nervous, mostly because the lizards were sort of scurrying. And I made the point about, anybody have any idea what these things are here on the wall? I know what they are. I often have to clean them off the wall of the church. I know exactly what they are. She was dressed too nice to be a social worker. She said, I'm his granddaughter. So we had a little talk. It isn't nice to see your grandpa living like this. For a long time, I didn't know where he was, she told me. I know some stories from his own lips. His wife kicked him out because he was doing drugs. And so he's been here for about 2 years now. And I know him by name. We have conversations. I often say to him, I'm not going to kick you off the property, but I really want something better for you. Can we find a way for something better? Oh, yeah, I'd like that. But nothing ever changes. Doesn't make any efforts. And I could call the police and have him evicted, but then, anyway, that gets into whole other things. She agreed with me. It isn't nice seeing your grandpa like this, but she says, you can't help nobody who doesn't want to help, who doesn't want to change. There's a lot of truth to that. He's got hardly any shelter. Sacramento temperatures are over 100 degrees. He used to have a bike back there, but now he has a walker, which to me is an indication that, as I've known many people in my years here, life is hard this way. You don't last. You age much more quickly if you're living like this. And basically, he panhandles, finds some money for food, probably has an EBT card, and uses most of the money that he can for drugs. And that's, what's he doing? Well, he's enjoying bliss. That's why he does it. And I don't know if he had a doctor's appointment or a family thing, but this is a lot of what I deal with on a day-to-day basis. 1990, Kevin Bacon, Julia Roberts, William Baldwin, Kiefer Sutherland, and Oliver Platt in Flatliners. Well, what did they do? They knew at this point, it was quite common that you had defibrillators, and so they would, in this movie, use a defibrillator to stop the heart so that they would die, and then they would resuscitate them so they'd have a near-death experience. And now, I'm being a little flippant here, but the point that they're making here isn't a bad one. I have known people who have had near-death experiences, and I have known people who have had near-death experiences, and those experiences have changed their life. I remember when I was a teenager, I used to babysit for a woman down the street who I remember I was going over there because she and her husband were going out and I was going to babysit. And she told me, she said, such and such thing happened to me and my heart stopped and I was dead on the table for such and such amount of time and I was brought back and I had this experience. And ever since that time, she was a religious person because these questions that dog physicalists, like what happens after death, was answered for her. Now, what's interesting is that the community that's going to be all excited about this, some of the people are going to be really down for the near-death experience too. But when you get to the end of this video, the skepticism and the physicalism that the video has within it, which is, again, the prevailing dominant religion of Western culture right now, will be skeptical about near-death experiences. Why? Because it's like, there's nothing after death. Why do they say that? That's their dogma. Their dogma is basically the deductive, rational conclusion of their worldview. All worldviews have dogma. The dogmas are the sometimes inconvenient consequences of a worldview. That's what a dogma is. So when people like Steve Jobs, Stanford, don't believe in dogma. Come on. You're BSing me here. I know you are. Don't believe in rationality. What was that? What was that line? I'm going to have to remember that line. This sentence is false. So, okay. But The woman that I babysit for had a near-death experience. She died on the table, and a whole group of doctors and nurses worked their hardest to bring her back. Flatliners, the whole premise of the movie was that these kids played with a defibrillator, stopped their heart, and then came back. It was the whole premise of the movie. Now, sort of what we have is, what's being promoted is, this is a safe way to experience death. I kind of experience it every night when I fall asleep, that little death that we have. It's sometimes called, no, this is, is this really like death? Well, sometimes it is. Well, it's heaven or hell. So it's like, oh, okay, so this is your argument. And again, I think this is the clearest, most concise, unlike this video, best argument that I see anybody make.
But an actual death that feels...
What do you mean by actual? Now, if you mean by now, okay, but the insinuation is, no, it's not actual. You're not flatlining these people. You are giving them a substance to induce an experience, because Joseph Campbell just was talking about experience, and now you're talking about death. So this is experiencing death. And again, some of you, I know I've had a number of conversations like this, some of you are going to say, yeah, but you don't understand because you've done it. Fair enough. I'm not doubting anybody's take that this was an experience of death and all of the stuff that you're going to talk about. I'm not doubting any of that experience, but let me just say it's an experience, just like my neighbor who flatlined on an emergency room table.
Acutely and terrifyingly real. In this
is that how you promote this stuff? I'm going to give you this thing and it's going to be terrifying. Now, some people like terrifying. They watch movies in order to be terrified. But it's always sort of like, oh, okay. But as long as everybody's wearing white lab coats and that other people say it's okay, or if you're part of the community that says no white lab coats, they're all liars, I prefer someone wearing the garments of the, I don't know, 2nd millennium BC. Well, fair enough. To each his own.
Lifetime, how can you know what it means to be alive?
And again, now we're drawing pictures with this here, okay? And the prophet of purpose could go through and say, blue leaves, double helix tree, open gates, you're, little hell down below. You're communicating to me. I get that.
And how can you even talk about an afterlife until you've seen it for yourself?
Okay. How can you talk about an afterlife until you've seen it? But later on in the videos, you can say there is no afterlife. So what are you actually talking about? And that's what we're going to get into.
These are the mysteries. Now, in some form or another, these mysteries made their way through the high civilizations of antiquity. Ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia.
Now, again, I haven't read the book yet. I have to explore the premise. Let me say that I am not at all skeptical of the idea that almost every civilization in the world found to one degree or another mind-altering substances. And some of those substances would have been what today we would categorize as psychedelics. It doesn't surprise me at all. I've also said many times, people have visions. I'm going through the Apostle Paul with my sermons right now. People are having visions. Apostle Paul had visions. Jordan Peterson has visions. Barbara Ehrenreich has visions. Lots and lots and lots of people have visions, okay? It's just part of being a human being. Throughout the ancient world, were some of these visions caused or at least contributed by playing around with psychedelic substances? Absolutely no argument with that assertion. Seems totally reasonable. Was this somehow connected with many world religions? Absolutely makes sense. I'm not skeptical about that at all. But these world religions also did things like build temples and pyramids and a lot of those kinds of things. And, well, I'm not sure how many people who are sort of living like this are building those kinds of things. And I'm sort of giving you a little peek at the secret that is my argument. I'm only 2 minutes into this video.
Indus Valley, China, but it comes to us, to Western civilization, through the ancient Greeks.
Okay. okay, yeah, Western civilization, the Greeks have a lot to do with it, not arguing with you there, but the Hebrews too. And a big, at least again, I haven't read his book yet, but I suspect a big weakness in this argument is going to be the Hebrews didn't really view intoxication with a lot of moral value.
Many of whom spent a lot of time in North Africa, by the way. 13 years in the case of Plato, the godfather of Western thought. So what did we inherit from these high civilizations? What are these mysteries? Like the mysteries of Eleusis that called to the best and brightest of Athens and Rome.
It's so funny that something like this is, because I don't know, if you're along the Greek coast and you find this really hot girl and she takes off her clothes in front of everyone and everyone's looking at her, that's not mysterious to me. As all the pornography on the internet will validate my assertion. But anyway, let's go on.
Rome, including Plato and Marcus Aurelius, from about 1500 BC to the 4th century AD.
And okay, so some of you are going to say, why, Paul, did you buy this book? And this is a great example of why I'm always caught in the middle. I'm curious. I'm high in openness. I'm curious. I didn't know a lot about the the Eleusinian mysteries, and so I'm looking forward to reading the book and learning some things. And now some of you are going to be like, well, then at the end of the book, then you'll see it our way. I say, wait a minute, you said this isn't something you could tell me or that I could learn. So if I'm going to take you at your word, reading this book shouldn't do it for me.
They were sacred rituals for turning mortals into immortals.
Sacred rituals for turning mortals into immortals. I've heard a lot about that. That's all over the world. If for example, you go to, I've got so many pictures. I won't pull up pictures. A couple of years ago, I went with my wife and my youngest son, and we visited the Cliff Dwellers over in Colorado and New Mexico. We didn't visit the Cliff Dwellers. We visited the national park, which had the abandoned remains of the Cliff Dwellers. And so, you get a chance to look into that. And, well, they would put on masks, and they would put on these, well, when they'd put on their mask, they would become the god, right? And again, there's lots of ways all around the world where people would become gods. There are many transformative rituals, experiences, religious things whereby people would become gods. And in fact, one might argue that, well, gosh, what was in that fruit that they're pulling off the tree? Then you eat it, you'll become God. Well, see, I just made a connection, and maybe I can write a book that says, see, the story of the Garden of Eden is a story about a psychedelic fruit tree. Only that story didn't end so well. Well, then again, and I'm not trying to be flippant here, but following the lines of the argument, maybe it makes that argument in the book, because it seems to me, well, the day that you eat it, you'll surely die. Oh, so you have to die in order to live, right? But again, a physicalist or a modernist or materialist or naturalist says, well, we don't really mean live. We mean the first one, well, kind of metaphorically too, because it's taken a substance, and the second one metaphorically. And I would say, with all this talk of metaphorical death, are you really just sort of playing around with this idea? Because as a culture, we take death pretty seriously. As well we should.
You went to Eleusis as a human being, and you walked away a god.
Okay. Now, again, and what do you mean by a god? I just read in my Sunday sermon how Herod Agrippa, and I read it both in the Luke version and in the version that's in Josephus, for those of you who caught the rough draft or even watched the sermon on Sunday. Herod Agrippa, the first, comes out with as Josephus says, a robe that was made up of silver. And when he stood in the light, he shone, and all of his flatterers said, it's a god. And well, we do this today. You have a fashion model or a really hot girl or a dude who we're about to have the Olympics and where we're about to enshrine people as gods in the pantheon of Olympic glory. We use that language. And well, What do you mean you come out of God? Because there's a lot of fudgery in the language of this video too. You come out of God. Okay, well, what do you mean? You mean like a demigod, like a superhuman, like Achilles, like Hercules, and C.S. Lewis plays with these words, and C.S. Lewis basically says, the transformation that the Holy Spirit is already proceeding in us will turn us someday into the kind of being that we today might be tempted to worship. That's what C.S. Lewis says in Mere Christianity. So,
how did that happen? Through this?
Well, I don't know. Maybe if I would get hair plugs and take better care of myself and have skin treatments and go to the gym a lot and come out and, oh God. What do you mean? Again, we use this language, but there's a lot of fudgery in this video.
Ceremonial experience of death and rebirth.
And whenever they say that, again, the video's like, but read Romans 6. That's baptism. So you're united with Christ. You're united with Christ's death in your baptism, and you're raised with Christ in baptism to new life. Now, someone might make the argument, well, baptism, you're not really supposed to swallow the water. But I guess you could make an argument that there's spores in the water. And so, no, I would say baptism is a ceremonial washing, and there's sort of dual understanding of it. It's washing away of our sins. And it's also, I'd say, a ceremonial ordeal, a water ordeal. And if you followed my sermons, you know that I pay a lot of attention to the ordeals in the Bible. A lot of them are in the book of Daniel. And there's a lot of visions in the book of Daniel. Are you saying that the visions in the book of Daniel, because Revelation always gets noted, but the visions of the book of Daniel are psychedelic trips? I can't say that Daniel didn't eat or drink something in Babylon, although if we're going to take chapter 1 seriously, he sort of wanted water and fruits and vegetables, which would sort of mitigate against the psychedelic argument for Daniel. But anyway, baptism is an ordeal of death and rebirth.
Let's be very clear. Eleusis and the other mystery cults of the time were the real religion of the ancient Greeks.
There's that fudgy real word again. Now, this part of the video, let's just play a little bit first.
The people who built Western civilization, democracy.
Listen to Tom Holland about what democracy meant in Athens. These are the people that built Western civilization. Are you going to blame American slavery on these people too? Because, again, read Tom Holland about the moral ethics of these cultures. I mean, there's a lot of fudgery in here.
The arts and sciences, the theater that became our Hollywood, the Olympic Games that became our sports industry, the open marketplace of ideas that we take for granted every day on social media.
So we're going to blame them for social media? And fair enough, that we certainly derive some of our values from this world. But again, you got to read Tom Holland on this, because Tom Holland first fell in love with this world and was excited about this world, and then so became a historian and a writer. And the more he read, the more he thought, these people are not like us. And read Tom Holland's books about Athens and about, this is a very strange world. But now the deeper contention he's saying is this is the real religion of these people. Okay, so now we can begin to ask the question, all right, if this is the best kept secret in history, if taking these substances affords this experience that is utterly transformative in people's lives, then what would our expectation be of what this religion would produce in these people's lives? Would taking these substances end slavery? No. Would it end war? No. Would it end infanticide? No. Would it end pederasty? No. Would it end all of the things that we look back? It's a really selective view of this, because Does anybody around here really want to simply go back to the way they lived and the way they fought? And now, little spoiler alert, the Greeks lost. They lost to Rome. And so let's tamp down our expectations on what this mystery is going to yield to us, because some other worldview won, and that worldview had a morality that is a whole lot closer to the present morality, and I would argue eschatology, a whole lot closer to the eschatology promoted by Athens or Sparta or Corinth or Macedon or Rome than we have today. Okay? So I appreciate, but again, there's a lot of fudgery in this video.
Didn't you ever wonder how the people who invented all this and the very word for skepticism could somehow believe in a bunch of fairy tales?
Now you just said Joseph Campbell was like your dude, and then you give us this line? I mean, have you learned nothing from Jordan Peterson? And yeah, if you read Plato, well, where does Plato's Republic start? Well, Socrates is down at the port. Well, what is he doing? He's watching a procession to a god. And there are the gods, and they've got a degree of skepticism about the gods, but, hey, what about Stoicism? Was Stoicism not the real religion of their day? What about Epicureanism? Was that not the real religion of their day? So I'm not arguing that these mystery cults weren't really important, but to sort of play it off, it's a huge anachronism that was the real religion of the day. Oh, you mean like Christianity was in the 15th century in Europe? No, there's way too much fudginess underfoot here.
Did they really think Zeus was perched on some mountaintop, hurling thunder?
I'm sure some of them did. In fact, if we have sort of the anachronistic ideology stories, well, isn't that where thunder comes from, right? Did they? Who's they? All of them? Or was it the common people believed in the gods, and it's only the real eggheads like Plato and Socrates, not many of them around in the population, they were skeptical about it, and these were some of the people who wrote. But the regular people, they went to the temples and they enjoyed the, later in Rome, the bread and circuses.
Thunderbolts down at us hapless humans? Or Poseidon was in the middle of the sea, patrolling the wind and waves with a freaking trident? Come on, man. Take the sea, patrolling the wind and waves with a freaking trident? Come on, man.
Fudge!
Take Cicero, the great Roman statesman of the 1st century BC.
Who all the Stoics claim, and a lot of the Stoics would be a little, the rationalist Stoics. I mean, that's all these rationalists out there. Oh, boy.
He called Eleusis the most exceptional and divine thing Athens ever produced.
And again, I'm going to read the book because I'm really curious about these questions. But don't present it as this was the main religion in Athens for the whole classical period, like Roman Catholicism was the religion in Europe in the 15th century. I'm more than a little skeptical of a claim like that.
Not democracy and free speech and all the rest of it. Eleusis was the thing.
Well, yeah, he was a Roman. Democracy in Rome. You know who paid taxes in the Roman Empire? Everyone but the Romans. You have the conquered people that pay taxes. And so, okay, what are you selling us here?
Thing we could never forget. It was said to hold the entire species together.
And again, I'm very curious about these statements, and so I'm going to look into them. I'm excited to do the research.
Why? Because you went to its sacred temple to experience nothing less than death and rebirth.
And, okay, fair enough. They're arguing that They had a psychedelic experience, and they experienced death and rebirth. And this changed the individual people so that what? They all were happy, so that they didn't divorce, so that they didn't have sex with boys, so that they didn't enslave the people that they conquered, so that no, to my reading, they did all these things. And going to this temple, after they left the temple, they thought, oh, slavery, what a bad idea. I shouldn't have sex with the slave girls anymore. Is that what they found? I look forward to reading that in the book, that they came out of the temple and suddenly they were moralists in the shape of the 20th or 21st century. I don't think he's going to argue that. Well, maybe they're not afraid of death anymore. Well, there you go. But they certainly kept threatening death on each other and their enemies and followed through, because basically when you conquered a city, the Romans knew and the Greeks knew how to conquer, how to rape, how to pillage, how to do all these things that a whole other side of our culture is now divorcing us from the ancient world and saying we're not like them because, well, we're going to have to take down the statues. I was just listening to The Rest is History about statues in Trafalgar Square. We're going to have to take statues down of all these generals that basically put down the Indian uprising. And, we've had a couple of decades now of people saying Christianity is bunk because it leads to imperial militarism. Well, if there's anything that Eleusis didn't do, it's address the imperial militarism of the ancient world. All right? So you're painting an awful pretty picture of this here, but you're asking that I forget everything else that we're talking about in our culture. Oh, you mean I should just assume all of this Christian morality and then add this little bit on top?
And only those who had made the long march from Athens to the torchlit sanctuary, drunk a magic potion, and witnessed the blessed sight and vision, as Plato called it, were said to conquer death.
Well, let's talk about Plato a little bit. Let's have the gold and the silver and the bronze, and let's look at Plato's ideal society, which, if you want to get a sense of what dikaiosune is from the inside, that thing that wells up and makes us just, well, we have to blow up a person into a society. Just read Plato's Republic. Once he went from Eleusis, then democracy? Plato was not down with democracy at all. Now, again, I think Plato's awesome. I like Plato. I like Socrates. I like Aristotle. All that stuff is fun. But let's measure our expectations here, shall we? Did Plato believe in life after death? Well, now we can have a big discussion about Plato, Middle Platonism, Neoplatonism. Platonism as it got wedded with Christianity. Neoplatonism has got wedded with Christianity via Augustine. Aristotelianism wedded with Christianity via Aquinas.
By experiencing just a taste of immortality, that rapture of being alive.
Oh, there we are. And And hey, church is guilty as charged. How many praise songs do you see somebody standing on the edge of a beautiful scene in a cliff with arms outspread, and usually not with the double helix tree and some upside down Hindu god looking backwards at you. But hey, Joseph Campbell's right. A lot of what we want is an experience of rapture. But then we're sort of stuck with Dan Fogelberg's song, How Can We Make Love Stay? How can we make rapture stay? Because at that point, now you're going to get into the question of, what do you do in the times that you're not rapturous? What do you do in the times when you're going shopping for the family, or going to work to put food on the table, or trying to create a civilization or a better society where people's medical needs are cared for, and to somehow figure out what to do with this incredible difficult puzzle of homelessness and addiction? And So if we put LSD in the water, then suddenly what? Pick your political utopia. Your woke republic is going to emerge, or your purely capitalist Ayn Rand republic is going to emerge. I don't think that's what's going to happen if everybody has this experience of death. Maybe they'll just say, doesn't matter.
And if you think about it, that's more science than religion. Once you've seen God...
What?
There's no unseeing God.
What do you mean by God? Once you've seen death? Are you saying death is God? Is this a Shiva thing? Because you just said you experience death and rebirth, and now you're saying that's seeing God. Okay, just as long as I'm clear on the definition.
You've proven the hypothesis for yourself. So what
I've proven the hypothesis. So now it's science and math we're doing. Okay.
the hell was going on? Frankly,
that's what I'd like to know.
No, it was all secret. To reveal what you saw in Eleusis was to risk execution.
Now, there's a little bit of duplicity here, too, because on one hand, and I take people very much at that word when they say, I cannot describe exactly what it is that I saw. So people will say, and I believe them completely, I cannot, what I experienced with that psychedelic was ineffable. I can't put it into words. I believe you 100%. Whether or not the Apostle Paul, now I'm going to get in trouble with the other side, whether or not the Apostle Paul had intentionally or unintentionally ingested something, well, he was on the road to Damascus. I really doubt that he was intentionally dosing up with some beer or wine when he was trying to make his way to Damascus to persecute people who believe that Jesus' resurrection really happened. He says, I cannot describe what I saw. I completely believe you. But to try to describe it as a crime? Was this a religious totalitarian state? You know, again, I think there's a little bit of fudging going on through here.
Which is why Houston Smith, perhaps the most influential religious scholar of the 20th century, called it...
That's because he wrote all those textbooks.
...the best kept secret in history. Like other rites of passage...
Yeah, the art communicates here too.
It was thought some archaic techniques of ecstasy were to blame for that famous vision at Eleusis. The same techniques employed since time...
Now, wait a minute. Ecstasy or death? I mean, if death is ecstasy, but, you know, I've listened enough about psychedelic experiences. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're good and bad. Okay.
Time immemorial in tribal initiation rites or admission to a secret society to create that near-death experience.
Okay, now, but this is ineffable, and you're also calling it a near-death experience, and you're also calling it ecstasy. So, okay.
Like fasting and sleep deprivation.
So, in other words, you can do it besides blunt forcing the chemical matrix of your brain to induce this experience. You can do this through years of meditation, through breathing exercises, through, let's say, a smoke machine and a great band and a skinny jean worship leader in your evangelical church. Because I know you can, because I've been there too. But that's not the same. I completely believe it's not exactly the same because, you know, even if I'm really enjoying a particular song as I'm driving in my car, I'm still able to drive my car. And nobody I know tries doing psychedelics behind the wheel.
Definitely get the job done, but there was another possibility. Remember that magic potion? In Greek, it was called the koukion, a kind of primitive beer. But it wasn't the only magic potion splashing around the Mediterranean. Dionysus, the Greek god of ecstasy and madness, he had a potion too. To drink his holy wine was to drink the blood of the god.
Now, again, I'm not skeptical about any of this stuff, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book about, because there's a lot in the book about beer and wine. It's what a lot of the reviews have said, and so I'm going to check it out. And absolutely non-skeptical about both the fact that there would have been what we might consider contaminants in ancient drinks that would have induced psychedelic states in people, and that this would have been intentionally part of many religious experiences. The fact that these continue, I mean, part of what happened in the Columbian Exchange when 15th century people, 16th century people began to explore the Americas, where their civilization in many ways was thousands of years earlier in terms of a developmental curve, that they found ayahuasca and all sorts of other things going on. Again, I'm not skeptical about this at all, and that it would be called the blood of the gods makes perfect sense, because once you start using the God word is sort of like a circuit breaker. Once you got a certain amount of voltage going through the line, bang, you start saying God. That's part of how that word works.
In fact, you were drinking the God to become the God. This is where we get the whole idea.
And again, same thing, to become the God. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, it's kind of like blowing the circuit breaker. You know, just something happens, God. That's how the word works for many human societies.
Idea of enthusiasm, from the Greek word enthusiazo. The essence of the God lives within you.
And that's right. Vervaeke keeps making that point again and again.
You have become divine. So what kind of beer and wine was this?
But now, let's watch the anachronisms a little bit here. Because of after, in Western civilization, deeply influenced by Christianity, whenever you use that word divine in this sense, you are pulling on very rigid, very structured Christian division between the God and everything else, because the creator-creature distinction in Christianity is a real fixed line. And for that reason, in this culture, you use that word divine or God, everybody sort of catches their breath because of the deep influence of Christianity in this culture. I suspect if you're an ancient, oh yeah, it's another God. It's divine. You're divine. I'm divine. He's divine. Got a little bit of divinity in my trackball here. We're just washing all over the place in the divine. But there's no catch, because you don't have thousands of years of Christian influence in the culture. Now it's got cachet. It's got sizzle, because in Christianity, the God of Christianity and Islam and Judaism is powerful and here and powerful. And, you know, if you're in a place where everything's just awash in the divine, it's like, oh, there's some divinity just went down the road. And, oh, there's some divinity passed out on my doorstep to my church, and some divinity took a poop against the wall back there, and I guess there's some divinity in the poop he let in the poop stain too. There's just divinity all over the place.
In 1978, at the height of the war on drugs, a controversial theory claimed...
Now we're going to get into, okay, big, bad, evil man tried to keep us from getting. Now we're back sort of to the Garden of Eden.
These magic potions must have been some crazy psychedelic concoction. Beer and wine spiked with mind-altering drugs.
No.
Must have been some crazy psychedelic concoction. Beer...
I think those pants are a psychedelic concoction. I probably used to have a pair of pants like that. I'm old enough to remember the 70s, baby.
Wine spiked with mind-altering drugs.
And you know, I don't think the sales job helps when you show the hippies, because the whole hippie thing, not a pleasant experience for a lot of the children who were neglected because mom and dad needed to just chase their divinities, okay? Because what a lot of those kids really wanted was maybe milk in the fridge in a reliable basis and someone to pay attention to them.
Maybe that was the best-kept secret behind the vision at Eleusis that lasted for 2,000 years. Maybe that fueled the wild parties of Dionysus.
I don't know. Again, I don't know that you need a psychedelic to have a party like this. I mean, just regular old wine and beer would do it, don't you think? At least that's my understanding.
Dionysus in the mountains and forests, from Spain to Italy to Greece to the Holy Land, giving birth to our poetry and music, our comedy and tragedy.
Again, a lot of broad brushing here.
Either way, the psychedelic theory was the wrong idea at the wrong time, with no hard scientific data to support it. Now, why?
And again, I think what's really cool about this book is now, by virtue of the science that we have and our archaeology has continued to push into the ancient world and history, I think he's got and again, he himself is not a psychedelic user. And so in terms of the question itself in an academic way, I'm down. I want to know. I cheer this project. But a lot of the religious fudginess that's being promoted by this is like, whoa.
Why does any of this matter? Because at the time, there was another healer who was into the mysteries. And he had a magic potion.
And now we're sort of like, we've got mysteries here and we got mysteries there. We got divinity here and we got divinity in the poop stain.
Too. And it made you immortal too. And he told weird stories that were...
And again, I think this is a valid thesis to explore. And I'm looking forward to reading his argument.
Recorded in ancient Greek. The same ancient Greek that was...
Now, okay, a little bit of sleight of hand there. It's recorded in ancient Greek. Oh, that's right. The canonical New Testament books we have are, in fact, in Koine Greek. Did Jesus speak these words in Greek? Now I've just stepped into a world of swirl of New Testament studies. Most would argue that the position was, no, he spoke them in Aramaic. Okay. Was this a thing in the Jewish community? Because in New Testament studies, theological, biblical studies all have fashions. And the hot spot right now for New Testament studies is understanding Jesus and the New Testament in the Second Temple Jewish context. And basically what he's saying is, forget the Jewish context. It's the psychedelic rave party. And it's like, color me skeptical.
Spoken by Plato and the initiates of the Greek mysteries. And when this healer was asked why he told such weird stories or parables...
So in other words, and, I don't want to be too flippant here because, again, it was Dallas Willard who, in The Divine Conspiracy, when he says Jesus is engaging the question of dikaiosune, sort of like Plato is in his Republic in the Sermon on the Mount. Okay. And certainly and again, if you're following my Sunday sermons, I'm really working hard. This idea is the Apostle Paul as a bridge. But to sort of cast Jesus as a psychedelic promoter in Second Temple Judaism, again, color me skeptical. Because in terms of New Testament studies, we've gotten a lot of payout from understanding Jesus as a Jew. Not Jesus as some Greek mystic who was slipping the Mickey in, the loaves and fishes he was distributing on the Jewish hillside.
Parables. He said, well, I'm talking about mysteria here. And he uses that word in Greek, mystery.
Now, it's also important to remember that these Gospels are targeted, okay? The Gospel of John, written by, it depends where you want to land on sort of the critical thing, written by John of James and John the disciple of Jesus, or written by another John, or written by someone in the Johannine community, reflecting the teaching of John who had settled down in Ephesus. The Gospel of John has a lot of Hebraisms in it, but the Gospel of John also written to a Roman context and an Eastern Roman Empire context. The Gospel of John, look at Saint Elijah's Orthodox in Kansas City, has a really cool series on the Gospel of John. but this is the kind of mysteries that they're talking about. It's like, again, if you say it in Greek, it's all fancy. But again, color me skeptical.
I'm not going to share the damn secret with just anybody, he says. But I'll tell you what, I'm here to give sight to the blind.
Now, again, there's a lot going on in this. But let's just zoom into, let's say, Matthew 13, where Jesus says, I speak in parables. So that, and just read Matthew 13. And then his disciples are like, well, tell us it straight. And then he does. Jesus doesn't pause and say, I'm giving out mysteries, saying these words. And the disciples say, we'd like to see the mystery. And Jesus says, eat this or drink this. It's not what happens. So again, and what's interesting in some of the articles, there's a real question of how far he pushes his thesis in some of these interviews. And especially with that interview with the Harvard scholar, he really sort of backpedaled.
As long as you die for it. You must be born again before you can see God's kingdom, he says.
Born from above. And he's talking to Nicodemus. So is he telling Nicodemus needs to do psychedelics? Why doesn't he tell that to the woman at the well? They're not drinking beer or wine at the well. He wants water, and he's going to give them living water. Now, again, I'm not completely dismissive of some aspects of this argument, and I want to read the book. But there's a lot of fudginess that a lot of people who don't know much about this will sort of glide over and say, aha, now what's the attraction in this? The attraction in our world would be something like the video I just released today. You mean I don't have to hate gays and vote Republican and be against abortion to be like Jesus? I just have to take some laced wine or beer? I don't have to go to church. I don't have to memorize Bible services. I don't have to sit in church and listen to some Protestant drone on. Or I don't have to go to an Orthodox church and look at the pretty pictures on the wall and try and figure out how to say the whole liturgy. And maybe if I find the right Catholic church, they'll put some spores in the bread, and then they'll lace the wine, and they'll take the wine and I'll lay back on the floor. And yeah, but really, what about 1 Corinthians 11? Because what Paul basically says is, I don't know, you're having your love feast there, and the rich and the powerful of Corinth are eating and drinking, having a good time, and the poor are left out. Now, if you sort of imagine very early church Eucharist celebrations in a 1 Corinthians sort of way, and it would seem to me that the 1 Corinthians would be down for all this because they were the ones who were really excited about spiritual visions and things. I don't know how the Judaizers would fare in this conversation. But it seems the Apostle Paul, who again, as he says to the 1 Corinthians, as I read in a couple sermons ago, and in 2 Corinthians 10 and following, says, I've had better visions than all of y'all, but you know what? As he said in 1 Corinthians 11, what you're doing with your love feast, which kind of looks like the little pictures that he paints here, I'd rather you stop. Now, if drinking the magic drink, the magic potion, somehow really afforded the payout that it does, why would the Apostle Paul ask them to stop if that's in fact what they were doing? Because maybe the Apostle Paul, very much in alignment with the Hebrew prophets, would have said, it's not ecstatic experiences I'm looking for from you. It's obedience. It's how you treat your neighbor. It's how you treat the poor. It's how it plays out. I mean, you can lay in the back of the churchyard putting poop stains on the wall in your ecstatic experiences with all kinds of street drugs, but that wasn't quite the new life that Jesus had in mind. It's not even so much the new life that this individual's granddaughter would like to see for her grandfather. And you would say, well, psychedelics aren't addictive. Yeah, I get that. But what are you telling me? it's certainly not having this one experience. And my question would be, how does this transformative experience actually pay out in your life? That's the question I want to ask. And how does it scale up in terms of community? And how does it scale up in terms of loving your neighbor as yourself? That's what I have to ask.
And once you do that, I tell you for certain, in Greek he says, amen, amen, like for real, that you will see heaven open and God's angels going up and down. In Greek, this healer was Jesus. We call him Jesus. And just like Dionysus, he was the Son of God, born of a virgin, who took on human flesh to leave us a gift.
And we can look at Matthew 11 and notice that he sort of disappointed the people because to some he didn't fast enough or prescribe fasting or hand washing sufficiently to satisfy some groups, and they called him a glutton. And other groups he wasn't celebratory enough, and they called him a faster. In other words, he didn't make anyone happy. And so the idea of kind of hippie Jesus who's, well, I don't know, why would he come to earth at all? And why not just stay in heaven and continue to enjoy the trippy life that is this image of heaven? Oh, but we haven't got to the end of the video. There's no heaven.
The gift of holy wine, his blood, that turns humans into gods.
Now, again, is that really the language that the New Testament uses? We'll become children of God by adoption, but it's not really, even in the ancient Greece, what they would imagine a god to be. Does it turn people who drink this become Alexander the Great? They become Hercules? They become Achilles? They become Aphrodite? That doesn't seem to hold at all with the rest of what we read in the New Testament, where Paul on one hand talks, and again, we're going to get to this as we go deeper and deeper into Paul. On one hand, Paul talks about being clothed with new life. On the other hand, I don't think they're going to be they're going to continue to have sort of a Jewish sexuality and a Jewish sobriety. And however you feel about the authorship of Titus or Timothy, what's amazing when Paul says, who do we want as leaders in these churches that I'm planting? They're really shopkeeper ethos. They're people who are reliable. And it's not people who, I want someone who can take some LSD that would down a horse. That's not the kind of people that he's picking.
But unlike Dionysus, Jesus founded the biggest religion the world has ever known. Why?
What did Jesus add that completely trounced Dionysus?
Today it's 2.5 billion people, like a third of the planet.
And all of that with 1900 years of repression against what you imagine started at the beginning. So where's the real success story here?
And if the earliest Christians knew how to brew up a psychedelic beer or mix up a psychedelic wine, and those magic potions were a direct path to die before you die,
then why, when it was suppressed in the 2nd or 3rd or 4th century, after that did it really grow? I mean, the argument undercuts itself. And so Jordan Peterson starts talking to this guy, and he's like, Jordan Peterson's looking for something to revive Christianity. Well, you might not want to look at this because, I don't know, read 1 Corinthians. Because if lacing everybody's communion wine with LSD kind of results in the Eucharist that we find described in 1 Corinthians 11, the Apostle Paul wasn't down with it, and he had better visions than any of them. That's the point of 2 Corinthians 10, 11, and 12.
To have that vision of the kingdom of heaven. And the best kept secret of Christianity is the same as the best kept secret of the ancient Greece that preceded it.
Really? Really?
Then it would rewrite the entire history of Western civilization.
Yeah, it would, because we, especially after Constantine, I got a fair amount of knowledge about what was going on in churches. And you know what? It didn't seem to look like this. It didn't look like, I always want to say Dionisio because that was a common name in the Dominican Republic. And in fact, one of the guys who worked in our office was Dionisio. So, your second language, or the in terms of the tier, the second language seems to corrupt all the other languages going on down.
Now, the real question is, what does this all mean for us today? How do we...
That's the real question. That's the third significant use of real in this video. I count.
Die before we die in the 21st century?
Now we're going to apply it to physicalists.
There's no one answer, of course. But in our leading
Science! Now we're back to lab coats, white lab coats, and the people who produce vaccines and antibiotics and have hospitals and science.
Medical schools, psychedelics are proving to be a safe and reliable means of producing that death and rebirth experience of the ancient mysteries. Now,
okay. In other words, having some, some chemist 400 years before Christ, certainly glad we have it today where we can purify these compounds. Are they the same compounds? We don't know. We're figuring that out. And again, I'd like to know. And again, if there are therapeutic applications for this, but there's a real sense that, and this is something I'm going to want to get into a little bit, probably not in this video. So, Michael, best to find it rather than get it wrong. So I haven't been listening to Joe Rogan since he's been on Spotify because it's just inconvenient. And what Michael Pollan learned from quitting caffeine for 3 months. That was a very interesting video. And part of what was interesting video about it was maybe I'll play a little bit of it. Now let's just talk about caffeine, a drug we use well. And this is where things are going to get funky because everything we eat or drink becomes part of our story, and part of our story in interesting ways.
So what would they had never experienced coffee before the 1600s?
That's right. They had in the Arab world. They'd had it from like 1200 or something like that. Supposedly it was discovered in 800s by a herder in like Ethiopia who noticed that his goats were getting very frisky when they ate this particular berry and would stay up all night. And so he kind of like started experimenting, or he brought it to these monks and they made a drink, and it's like, ooh.
It makes
those monks
sense that it was in the Arab world, because if you think about all the science that was being done in the Arab world, all the literature back then.
So one theory is that the Arab world had coffee first and had this incredible golden age.
Yes.
So coffee gave us math. And again, I'm not skeptical, but my point in all of this is that the foods we eat and drink and the ways that they affect us. And again, we're in the age right now of taking a very careful look about what we eat and drink. We got Jordan Peterson eating nothing but beef and water. We've got people with paleo diets. We've got intermittent fasting. We've got the stuff we put in our mouth impacts us and scales up into society.
And there's a historian of psychoactives named Wolfgang Schivelbusch, and
that's a great name.
What a name.
Isn't that wonderful? German, of course. Wolfgang Schivelbusch. It's a great book. It's called Tastes of Paradise. Highly recommend it.
So what is it, the psychedelics or is it caffeine?
And he said this was the perfect drug for the culture that invented mathematics and had this incredible, and it helped the culture in two ways. One was, as safe as alcohol made water, boiling it made it much safer. And coffee and tea, of course, both require boiling water. No one drank boiling water or hot beverages before. So this gave this incredible public health boost to these places. And then you have the drug that basically fosters a kind of more linear, rational, focused way of thinking.
Oh, drug matchup. we've got caffeine, rationality, and psychedelics, irrationality, steel cage match for human spirituality. Oh, they're going to meme the heck out of that one.
I've never done them myself. Psychedelics are absolutely not for everybody.
Hey, wait a minute. This is the key to eternal life, and you're going to withhold it from some people? Which people?
They are powerful and unpredictable and need to be approached with caution and reverence. But under the right conditions,
Science!
and with the right preparation,
Science!
there are genuine mystical reports.
Wait a minute. I see people doing that all the time outside my front door.
Over the past 20 years, almost 75% of the volunteers at Johns Hopkins and NYU who've taken just one dose of psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, will rank it among the most meaningful experiences of their lives.
Again, I'm not a skeptic. I'm not saying they shouldn't be studying this. I'm not saying we shouldn't have this conversation. I'm just saying I'm going to be watching the fudge.
So as these compounds become legal in the coming years, it begs a big question.
Yeah, there's a lot of begging the question in this video.
Have the mysteries returned? Well, some of these clinical volunteers say their psilocybin journey is like a mini death all in itself, a foreshadowing of what awaits them at the end of life.
So again, back to the near-death experience thing here. And how would you know that this is a death if you haven't experienced death? And it's sort of like C.S. Lewis talking to the little boy, and, little boy doesn't know what sex is like because he's not growing up in ancient Greece. And the kid's like, will there be chocolate? And Lewis is like, well, I guess you could add chocolate if you want to, but I tend to think when you get there, chocolate won't be really what's on your mind. Might be what's on hers.
And just like the initiates of the mysteries of Eleusis, or the mysteries of Dionysus, or the earliest Christians 2,000 years ago,
Yeah, but I don't think Jonathan Peugeot draws pictures like this. He must be one of those evil guys like Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan.
Experiencing their death, they found the immortality key.
Well, again, Romans 6.
They've rediscovered that ancient principle. The only way to experience God is to let...
Oh, whoa. The only way to experience God? Again, circuit breaker, bang, God.
Go the rational mind.
Well, I guess we're giving up on caffeine then.
And when the ego gives up, your consciousness begins to expand beyond the body.
When the ego gives up, the consciousness begins to expand beyond the body. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And, it's always when people tell me that they're denying their ego, I usually ask for things like the deed to their house. And suddenly the ego reemerges.
Beyond space and time. Beyond the very categories of being and non-being.
And again, deed to your house, please. Thank you. If you'd really like to give up on being and non-being, I'd like the deed to your house and your car and your 403B, because mine's a little small. And I don't know, seeing this very, is it egoic? It might be a little erotic.
Find itself looking back at itself. Well, there's your new definition of God.
I wasn't looking for a new definition of God, and I'm not sure that's a really good one,
said Joseph Campbell.
Oh, okay, sorry. But you're quoting him.
But the ultimate, unqualified mystery is beyond human experience. It
Okay.
becomes inflected. As they say, there is a condescension on the part of the infinite to the mind of man.
Well, yeah, John Calvin called it accommodation.
And that is what looks like God.
Looks like God. Well, did that woman flying up like this look like God? I guess she's in the image of God. But again, there's just a lot of fudginess going on here. And again, I think for a lot of people, God is sort of when the circuit breaker trips once you put enough stuff through the voltage. But again, this is leveraging 2,000 years of Christian influence where you have a God which is big and powerful, and there's a really hard creator-creature distinction, and there's Almighty and Lord of Hosts and all of that thing. Suddenly saying this name gets cachet, as opposed to a culture in which we're just swimming in divinity.
This business of understanding the relationship of mortality to something in you that is transcendent of mortality.
Whoa, now the physicalists are getting a little worried about the woo.
Is the big job.
But if you don't die now, you might never experience that ultimate mystery of being.
Oh, don't worry. I can very much promise you, you are going to die eventually. Okay? And you're going to experience it, hopefully, if it's like not in an instantaneous way. So what you really want to do is have experienced death. Okay, are we back to flatliners?
As the mystery of your being. That to know yourself at the deepest level is really to know God.
Fudge.
I mean, we don't have a word for it, but we call
We got a lot of words for it.
it God, this divine
Again, the circuit breaker.
spark that lives in you.
That's what we call God? Because this dude was taught by the Jesuits. Now, I've been reading about the Jesuits in my book Reformations, and those Jesuits, I know one particular Jesuit that a lot of people are not particularly happy with now, because I think that Latin Mass sort of was a pretty transcendent thing for a lot of people.
And you might never understand that heaven is...
You're going to have to get this experience before you really have the experience. It's sort of a bucket list here, right? That's the argument?
not what happens when the physical body wastes away.
Whoa, wait a minute. Then why are you using the word death? Because now you just sort of undermine the whole argument you were making in this video.
And you might never understand that heaven is not what happens when the physical body wastes away.
There's an assertion. I hope the Jesuits didn't teach you that. Because Jordan Peterson asks, well, you getting in trouble with any of these Christian people? I don't know. We'll see if he sees this video. And again, I'm not his enemy. I'm not against studying this. I bought the book. I bought the audio book. I'm going to check it out. I'm really curious. I'm really curious about the ancient argument. But when you lay down something like this, it's like, oh, that's right, you're a physicalist. Because unlike, let's say, the ancients that probably imagined, at least some of them imagined there was something after life. Maybe all of those people that you're skeptical that they really believed in Zeus and Poseidon and all of that. It's like, did you ever watch Vikings on TV? Even the writers of that show imagined that Vikings actually really believed in Thor. And so I would say that a lot of Greeks really believed in Zeus.
And there is no afterlife.
That's just an assertion.
Because there is no after. There's only right here, right now.
There's another physicalist assertion.
The kingdom of the Father is spread upon the earth, says the Gospel of Thomas.
Ooh. You know, if you really don't want to be tagged a Gnostic, don't quote from a Gnostic gospel. I am so bad in this video.
And people do not see it. For the ancient philosophers and mystics, it was never about living forever within the field of time.
There's a big assertion. Is that Jesus in that picture? Like the one with kind of the suspenders or the one with... they didn't wear clothes like that. Now, what has sort of happened? Well, now we've addressed pluralism. Now, in fact, we have the one religious key to make sense of it all, which isn't what we're looking for. We want to deal with pluralism. We want to deal with life after death. But we don't want to leave our physicalism. We don't want to wander off and to say something in public that would, cause embarrassment like, I don't know, I'm still waiting for Jesus' second coming, and I hope he brings heaven with him and the renewal of all things. Call me a fundamentalist, but There I am.
just going on and on until the stars fade
Oh, so now we're on to the good life.
and the cosmos goes dark.
Oh, so now we're adding heat death of the universe. Now, where's Lawrence Krauss? He should be in this somewhere.
It was never about life after death.
It was never about life after death? Well, gosh, when Jesus, I think Peter and Paul and them believed Jesus walked out of the grave, and when he ascended into heaven, and when the angel said to Peter, he's coming back in the same way, and the church has sort of kept up this idea, I don't think I know that there are Christians who will say this, but I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I don't believe this. You've sort of recast Jesus because you've scraped some stuff out of goblets from the ancient world. Again, call me skeptical.
It was always about venturing into the time.
It was always about RetCon. Isn't that what it's called? No, it's not. What is that called? RetCon. In a film, television series, or other fictional work, how about in a religion, a piece of new information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events typically used to facilitate a dramatic plot shift or account for inconsistency. This is the psychedelic retcon. I might have a title for this video.
Timelessness of the infinite present to realize your own divinity.
See, again, point I just made. If you say this word after your culture has been radically shifted by the creator-creature distinction, that word has punch. Did it really have so much punch in the ancient world? This is a giant attempt at a retcon.
And the divinity of everyone and everything around you.
Is that what the Greeks thought? Did the Greeks really think that? Did going to this temple make all of the Greeks, wow, I look at the divinity in my slave boy. Let me have sex with him. I don't think so.
Which is love in its purest form.
I don't think they even called it love when they did that to their slaves. They were just taking care of business.
Maybe that's what it means to be fully alive. And maybe that's what ancient sacraments were for, like holy beer and holy wine.
But again, it didn't play out in the purest form of love to their slaves. Christianity brought that. And again, precisely what the Apostle Paul addresses in 1 Corinthians 11 is that point.
To help us glimpse that perfect love and perfect peace. And maybe what we're seeing now is a modern-day sacrament.
What do you mean by sacrament? Because in a physicalist world, I don't think you can have one.
Descending on Western civilization. During her psilocybin session, one of the volunteers, Dinah Baser, a self-described atheist, had the overwhelming feeling of being bathed in God's love.
Now, what kind of an atheist would say something like that? Well, the vision here is, well, we can transcend the atheist-theist divide. So just, and you see it with Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. Jordan Peterson's like, take a higher dose. And Sam Harris has said, I've taken plenty. And Jordan Peterson's like, not enough to stop you from being an atheist. And I think I'm not interested in that fight.
And the sudden epiphany that every moment is an eternity of its own.
Now, you don't really need to do a psychedelic to do that. I spent 2 hours in the DMV this week, and I had a lot of moments that felt like eternities.
Sounds awfully familiar.
Me too.
Eternity isn't some later time. Eternity isn't a long time. Eternity has nothing to do with time. Eternity is that dimension of here and now, which thinking in time cuts out.
It's sort of like my grandma's talk. Outside you see this old lady, but inside, time hasn't time hasn't changed. Now, she didn't have these words, and I didn't have those words back then. I'd say, well, Grandma, in some ways, the person you're describing is a story. And that story isn't obliterated by the death of your physical body. And I don't think that formulation is antithetical to Christianity. Now, I do believe in the resurrection. The story and the flesh come back together. I think that's the meaning of resurrection. And I see this as kind of, okay, I'm a Christian pastor. I'll lay my cards on the table. I think all of these attempts to reduce Christianity are reductions. And I think this is a retcon reduction of Christianity.
This is it.
Well, that's what physicalism says. This is it. Bill Moore's like, well, Bill Moore's got his own religious ideas, obviously, but this is it. Yeah, this is it. So guess what? Joseph Campbell, dead.
This is mine.
If you don't get it here, you won't get it anywhere. And
I hope Joseph Campbell got it while he was here, because according to his idea, you don't get it anywhere. You're done. Sorry. YOLO.
the experience of eternity right here and now is the function of life.
The experience of eternity right here and now is the function of life. Guess I'm going back to the DMV, and I'll get in line. I'll say, do you have like a number you're waiting to be called? No, I'm experiencing eternity here at the DMV.
If you die...
For those of you who are not living in the United States, that's the Department of Motor Vehicles. And here in America, that's a government office. And that government office tends to reinforce the Republican idea that government doesn't work so well. Now, in all fairness to the Democrats, I've seen the equivalent overseas, and ours works a lot better than overseas. But overseas, the differential in income made it wealthy enough for me to pay Dionysius to go to the DMV and wait in line for days, because that was his job, to do that for us rich white missionaries. Ain't colonialism grand? Gosh.
Before you die, you won't die when you die.
Okay, remember? Early, I told you to remember that? Okay. Now you can understand this line. He's going to give it to us in Greek.
An pethanis, prin pethanis, denta pethanis, otan pethanis.
Because everything always sounds a little bit more mystical when you say it in another language you don't understand. You can understand this statement in a Christian worldview, because you're talking about exactly what he previously denied and what Joseph Campbell just went to great pains to deny. So in a Christian worldview, this phrase makes sense. But in this physicalist worldview, now we're talking hyperbole, just like you need to experience not a what kind of death. Or again, are we playing flatliners?
Well, if that's the best kept secret in history, maybe it's time for the secret to get out.
You know, if you call it a secret, you might get into copyright challenges with, wasn't it these people? Now, I don't think they had the same psychedelic secret for that. The secret then, wasn't that something like, I haven't looked at it, wasn't it something like the law of attraction? Which, again, I live in Northern California. I've got lots of friends who are really into this kind of stuff. What's the law of attraction? Well, I'm going to manifest. You know, it's sort of like Joel Osteen without the churchiness around him. I'm going to manifest wealth. I'm going to manifest beauty. I'm going to manifest hair, long, flowing Fabio hair. I'm such a bad YouTuber. I'm being a good YouTuber when I do this, but I guess I'm being a bad pastor because I'm mocking. But I watch people do this stuff, and I just think, no. Are we done yet?
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of After Skool. I'm Brian Muraresku, and if you enjoyed this video...
Muraresku. That was the secret that I've been waiting the whole time to know how to say his name.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of After Skool. I'm Brian Muraresku, and if you enjoyed...
Muraresku. So I want to do another video where I talk about, maybe I will, maybe I won't, I don't know, maybe I just got this off my chest in this video. And I know I'm sure some of you are going to unsubscribe after you listen to this, or maybe I've just challenged you. Say, you know, when Paul Vanderklay comes through for his estuary tour and he has that little drink there, I'm going to slip a little something in it, and we're going to watch Paul trip. And I don't know if you'd like me when I'm tripping, because when I get a little testy like this is, maybe I got a little caffeine in me. Maybe that's what's making me rational. So anyway, I don't know if you should forgive me this video, but that's honestly, this is how I feel about this stuff. And I bought the book. In fact, I bought it twice. I bought the Kindle book and I bought the audio book, and I'm going to check it out because I'm very curious about the historical aspect. Again, this guy hasn't dabbled with this stuff. I'm interested in the science part of it. I'm interested in the conversation, but as a platform for a whole new religion that's going to somehow, and again, my question at the end of it is, please tell me the eschatology you intend for this to yield. Because if your assertion is that this was, in fact, the default religion of the classical period, we have a pretty good idea about what that religion yielded. And we have a pretty good idea about the kind of religion that basically substituted and replaced it, and the growth and dramatic transformation that religion brought to the world, especially in the moral realm, doesn't seem to be connected with the happy juice in a temple in Greece. That's what I'm saying. So, in fear and trembling, let me know what you think in the comments.